name of Jesus, Jesus repels you. Jesus loves this boy. This is terrible.
Wake him out of it. Strap him up. Do something.
In today's episode of Origins Explained, we analyze The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, and compare the movie version to the real-life events. Was Arne Johnson really possessed? What role did the Warrens play? Are the Disciples of Ram a real cult? Let's get into it. The movie begins at the Glatzel house in Brookfield, Connecticut, where Ed and Lorraine Warren are documenting the exorcism of David Glatzel. The Glatzel family consists of parents Judy and Carl, older sister Debbie, and little David Glatzel. Arne Johnson, Debbie's boyfriend, is also there to help out. While the Glatzels are worried about David, the Warrens assure them everything will be fine now that the exorcism has been approved. According to the on-screen text, the exorcism happened on July 18, 1981, when David was only 8 years old. However, there were actually numerous exorcisms performed on 11-year-old David throughout the last half of the 1980s. These were all deliverances, or lesser exorcisms, because the Bishop of Bridgeport did not authorize a formal exorcism. According to Father Nicholas Grieco, Director of Communications for the Diocese of Bridgeport, one of the reasons a formal exorcism was not approved is that the family did not consent to the psychological tests the church considered necessary. The Glatzels employed the help of Ed and Lorraine Warren as a last-ditch effort to help cure David. Regarding their first encounter, Lorraine said that while Ed interviewed the boy, I saw a black misty form next to him, which told me we were dealing with something of a negative nature. Soon the child was complaining that invisible hands were choking him, and there were red marks on him. He said that he had the feeling of being hit. He also made numerous references to murder and stabbings. We were sitting on a powder keg. While they wait for Father Gordon to arrive and perform the exorcism, David is attacked and becomes possessed. They manage to temporarily subdue David, but once the exorcism starts, he starts foaming at the mouth, growing boils on his face, and twisting his body. Drew, the Warren's assistant, films the whole ritual, even as things take a chaotic turn. Father Gordon's knocked out, prompting Ed to finish the exorcism. David, now fully possessed, interrupts the ritual by giving Ed a heart attack. David almost kills Ed, but Arne decides to intervene by inviting the evil entity inside to take him instead. Things calm down as David is freed and Arne becomes the new host, but Ed is on the brink of death. According to the Glatzels, David had been possessed for over a year. At the time, Arne Johnson had been living with the family and tried to help David out. He'd stay up all night with the family, touched his crucifix to David's forehead, and even pinned the boy to his bed when unseen forces tried tossing him around the room. The Warrens warned Arne about the dangers of talking to the demons, but Arne wouldn't listen. According to Lorraine, Arne would actually say, "Come into me, leave the little lad alone." While there are no photographs of the actual rituals, multiple witnesses claim that David levitated. Director Michael Chaves wanted to really put audiences back on their heels, so he opted for the contortion sequences in the movie to create an unsettling atmosphere. Judy Glatzel said David would kick, bite, spit, swear terrible words, and would experience strangling attempts by invisible hands and powerful forces that would flop him rapidly from head to toe, like a rag doll. The Warrens maintain that 3 lesser exorcisms were performed on David, the first being at St. Joseph's with 4 priests in attendance. During the rituals, they found out that David was being possessed by 43 demons. However, while Father Grieco believes that the events were somewhat bizarre, he insisted that no formal exorcism was ever asked for or performed. Ed Warren disputed that claim, saying that a formal exorcism had been requested and caught on tape, but the priests involved did not comment and were transferred to other parishes. Back at their place, Arne and Debbie talk about their future now that David is no longer possessed. We also briefly meet Bruno, Debbie's boss at the boarding kennels. Bruno's real-life counterpart was Alan Bono, a dog groomer who had recently moved into the community and hired Debbie to work at the Brookfield Kennels. While she made sure the dogs were taken care of, Alan would sit and drink since he knew nothing about running the kennels. Meanwhile, we see Arnie's possession starting to take hold. He starts hearing voices, sees boxes moving, and comes face to face with the apparition of a woman who takes a hold of him. At the same time, Lorraine accompanies Ed while he is in the hospital after suffering a major heart attack. When Ed finally wakes up, he warns Lorraine about the demon and how it's now possessing Arne. While Ed Warren did suffer various heart attacks, he didn't actually experience one from the Glatzel exorcism. Ed had suffered many heart attacks during the 1980s, and one even put him in a wheelchair for months. Back in Brookfield, we notice Arne keeps seeing visions of the woman who grabbed him earlier and how it's affecting him. He meets up with Bruno and Debbie back at the dog kennels and is clearly not doing well. Suddenly, he sees Bruno turn into a monster that attacks Debbie. As he gets her away from Bruno, everything turns black, and Bruno lunges at him. We then jump to Arne walking on the side of the road in a trance when a cop sees him and arrests him for the murder of Bruno. In the real-life events, a similar argument between Arne and Alan Bono may have led to Bono's murder. There were 4 witnesses: Debbie, Arne's 2 younger sisters, Wanda and Janice, and their cousin Mary. According to Wanda's account, Bono bought them all lunch at a bar and had gotten pretty drunk. When they went back to the kennels, there was tension in the air, and Bono grabbed Mary as she was leaving, not letting her go. Arne confronted Bono, and when the argument reached a boiling point, Debbie watched in horror as Arne repeatedly plunged a 5-inch pocket knife into Bono's chest. This was the first murder in Brookfield's history. Arne claims he blacked out and has no memory of the event. The day after the murder, David told Debbie of a vision he had regarding Bono's death. According to Debbie, David said he had seen the Beast go into Arne's body, and it was the Beast who had committed the crime. The Beast was the nickname the Glatzel family gave to the demon possessing David. Debbie also mentioned that Arne had gone through 4 similar trances in the 6 months before the murder. He would growl and say he saw the Beast. Later he would have no memory of it. It was just like David. He was arrested 2 miles from the scene of the murder. In jail, Ed and Lorraine get Arne to read from the Bible, and they come to the conclusion that Arne is no longer possessed. However, when they talk to his lawyer, they ask her to plead not guilty because of the existence of the devil. At first she's doubtful, but once they show her Annabelle the doll, they convince her to plead not guilty by reason of demonic possession. While the movie version of Arne's lawyer was reluctant to make a case for demonic possession, the real-life lawyer was not as conflicted. Martin Minella, Arne's attorney, had this to say regarding the case. Everybody asks, "How could you come up with a defense like this? I didn't come up with this. This is what was presented to me. I went to see Ed and Lorraine, and I decided to take the case after talking to them. They told me that when you're possessed, you have no control over your actions." That stuck in my mind. Arne pled not guilty by virtue of the fact that the devil made him do it. Minella even traveled to Europe to confer with lawyers who had dealt with 2 possession defenses. He was even willing to fly in exorcists from Europe and subpoena the priest involved in the exorcisms if they didn't come forward. Minella said, "I'm going to show Arne isn't insane and that it's not a delusion. The courts have dealt with the existence of God, and now they'll be asked to deal with the existence of the demonic spirit." However, unlike the movie, the Warrens did not show Minella the doll Annabelle to convince him. But maybe he saw something else: money and celebrity. "Everyone is interested in this case," he says. "Everyone. We got calls from Australia, from Switzerland, from England, everywhere. When I went to London, they recognized me on the streets. All the top studios are interested in this. All the top producers. Of course, my position is that we won't talk until after the trial is over. My client is more important to me." Some even labeled the case as the demon murder trial. As the Warrens investigate Arne's case, they review a recording from July 18th, 1981, where they interview Arne and the Glatzel family. 5 months earlier, the Glatzels move into their new house, where David finds a room with a waterbed. He decides to jump on it, but is suddenly attacked by a black hand, trying to pull him into the water. In the Glatzel house, everything started on July 3rd, 1980. The previous tenants had left the waterbed behind, and when David was alone in the room, he felt something push him onto it. When he looked up, he saw an old man in a torn plaid shirt, blue jeans, and coarse skin. The man pointed at him and said, "Beware." Later that night, David saw the man again, but this time his skin was burned and charred. He was barefoot this time, showing he had hooves for feet. When he told his family, they thought it was a ghost and contacted the Warrens. However, the Warrens knew that it wasn't a ghost. According to them, the spirit infesting David Glatzel was inhuman and evil. David had begun missing classes, gained 60 pounds, growled, hissed, and spoke in strange voices. He would recite passages from the Bible and Milton's Paradise Lost, and also jerk into 30-minute frenzies of rapid sit-ups. However, David was not the only one to see the beast. Debbie describes what she saw as follows. "I saw a face with jagged teeth and coal-black eyes. It had horns and pointed ears." Following a hunch, the Warrens investigate the house and find the witch's totem under where the waterbed once stood. They claim that David was cursed by a member of a satanic cult, and when Arne invited the spirit inside him, the curse moved as well. Father Gordon suggests it may be related to the disciples of Ram and tells them to talk to Father Kastner, who previously dealt with the cult. While the disciples of Ram may sound interesting, they are not based on a real-life cult, but are actually part of the Conjuring's fictional universe. First mentioned in the movie Annabelle, they are simply a group of occultists that want to bring demons into our world. Other than that, we don't really know much about them. However, their inclusion is not just a reference to their own fictional universe, but also a nod to the satanic panic of the 1980s in the US. This was a time when there was a widespread belief that satanic cults throughout the US were conducting rituals involving human sacrifices and more. However, investigations by the police couldn't substantiate any allegations of organized cult abuse. To find out more, the Warrens meet up with Father Kastner, who tells them he recognizes the totem as one of the items used by the disciples of Ram. Kastner takes them to his office and warns them that going up against a master occultist won't be easy, and may cost them their lives. For additional help, the Warrens contact Sergeant Clay from Danvers, Massachusetts, who said he may be able to help them. They talk about Katie Lincoln and Jessica Louise Strong, two young women who disappeared not too long ago. Katie was stabbed 22 times and found dead, while Jessica is still missing. In their search, the cops found a witch's totem in Jessica's house that's similar to the one from the Glatzel house. Lorraine uses her powers to figure out that Jessica killed Katie while being possessed and then killed herself by jumping over the cliff into the lake. However, just like the disciples of Ram, the case of Jessica Louise Strong is fictional. In addition to serving as a side story that moves the plot along, it shows Lorraine working with the police, which is something that happened in real life. Lorraine helped the police on various missing persons cases throughout the 1980s, and in 1989, the Department of Justice even issued a handbook on how to work with psychics and clairvoyants. Back in prison, Arne keeps seeing visions caused by the occultist, and he attempts to kill himself. The Warrens try to help him by going to the morgue and getting a reading from Bruno's dead body. Lorraine sees Arne being possessed, but before they can help, the occultist uses her powers and attempts to kill them. But Ed breaks the connection just in time. Back at their place, they meet up with Debbie and Drew. They find the ritual that the occultist is carrying out and realize that she's trying to get Arne to kill himself. In the middle of their meeting, Ed passes out due to his heart issues. The occultist uses this opportunity to manipulate him into attacking Lorraine. However, they're able to break the spell and find the cursed totem in their house. In trying to find the connection between Arnie's case and Jessica's case, Lorraine goes to see Father Kastner for help. However, Ed figures out that the occultist is at Father Kastner's house. As it turns out, the occultist is Kastner's secret daughter. He tried to hide her from the world, but his obsession with the cult rubbed off on her, and she became part of the disciples of Ram. She makes herself known, kills her father, and has to face off against the Warrens while also trying to complete her ritual and kill Arne remotely. However, Ed destroys her altar and ruins her ritual, causing the demon she was summoning to take her life as payment. As for Arne, he's now free of the occultist and her influence, and he's going to court to answer for his crimes. The movie tells us that on November 24th, 1981, Arne was convicted of manslaughter, served 5 years, and married Debbie while in prison. While his lawyer may have argued that Arne was possessed, Judge Robert Callahan ruled the defense to be infeasible in court. He argued that no such defense could ever exist in a court of law due to the lack of evidence, and that it would be irrelative and unscientific to allow related testimony. As a result, Arne's lawyer dropped the demon possession angle and instead claimed that Arne was acting in self-defense. The jury never even had the opportunity to consider demonic possession as a possible explanation. On November 24th, 1981, the jury found Arne Cheyenne Johnson guilty of first-degree manslaughter. Even though he was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison, he only served 5. In the after-credits scene, they show an interview with the Warrens and play an audio recording of David Glatzel being possessed.
David,
In the name of Jesus, Jesus repels you. Charlie loves this boy. This is
Wake
Charles.
him out of it. Strap him up to something.
This is an actual recording from one of the various exorcisms they did on David. Even though they don't have a video recording, you can hear some of the sounds the Glatzel family described, and perhaps can understand why they sought the Warrens' help. Whether Arne Johnson was truly possessed by a demon when he murdered Alan Bono, we may never know. However, if you ever run into a demon, just follow the Warrens' advice. Never invite them in.